Good evening. I am Janine Castello-Lynn, co-chair of Berkeley Historical Society's program committee. And I'd like to welcome you tonight to our program, Meet Jacomena Maybeck. And tonight we are very fortunate to have with us author Pam Valois, who should be in the center of your screen there. We'll be sharing photos, vignettes, and excerpts from diaries from her latest book, Blooming in Winter. And tonight, Pam will also be sharing some delightful short clips from interviews that the Berkeley Historical Society did with Jacomena Maybeck back in 1989. So this is Pam Valois' second book. Her first, Gifts of Age, showcased Pam's beautiful photography and included portraits of Jacomena Maybeck. Pam was lucky enough to live across the street from Jacomina when Jackie was still living at High House on Maybeck Twin Drive, the house built for her and her husband Wallen by Bernard Maybeck many years before. So now I'd like to invite Pam Valois to share with us the Jacomena Maybeck she came to know.
One thing.
Well, this is the first slide. The cover of the book, which will tell you how you can get at the end of this program. So Pam, you can tell us about this house.
Well, let's see. So are we ready to start?
Yes.
Are you ready? Okay, well, I can't see myself, so that's probably just as well. Hello, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank Anne and Janine and the whole Berkeley Historical Society for planning this event. I'm so excited to do it. Don't go any farther on slides quite yet. And I wanted to do a special welcome to my sisters from the She Writes Press who published my book, and also to family joining us from Solana Beach and Salt Lake City. So this webcast, if you can see me, or as you saw me earlier, this webcast is coming from the house that we call High House, which was Jacomina's house. And I'm sitting in the one big room, the big living room. So I start with Janine, who asked me, why did I write this book, Blooming in Winter? And I hope that I will answer that during this talk and that you'll understand why. I'm now the same age as Jacomena Maybeck was when I met her. She was 76 in 1977 when my husband and I entered the cottage gates to this cottage. And some of you have heard the story, but I'll just tell it briefly. We were hoping to move from San Francisco to Berkeley and made an appointment with Jacomena Maybeck, who owned this house. And we walked in the cottage gates right down those little stepping stones and couldn't see her. And then we looked up and there she was on the roof in her halter top and her shorts, and she was tarring the roof. And then she climbed down a ladder and we chatted. And she said, well, she liked us, but she would like to come over to our San Francisco flat and see how we lived. So the next weekend she drove over. Let's go back. We're still on the cottage. The next weekend we drove over and made a quiche, we remember at the time. And we were reminded of Bernard Maybeck, who, when he was getting ready to design a house for a client, he would go and have several meals with them. He would sit around afterwards, listen to the music they listened to, see where they sat, how they read, where they read. And I think Jackie was doing the same thing. But the difference for us was that we had a very young parrot, maybe a 2-year-old parrot at the time. And he was scared to death of strangers, didn't like anybody. But as soon as Jackie sat down at the table, he jumped on the table and hopped over and started pecking at her Navajo bracelet. And so for us, that was the magic of the moment. We think it was thanks to Pepe that we were able to rent the house. And if you look in this picture, I call this the 3 farmhands picture. In the far right, up on Lloyd's shoulder, you can see Pepe. So Pepe was maybe 4 or 5 years old then. And he's still here. He's right here in this room. Later, he might make some noises. He still likes to look through the window across to Jackie, to the cottage where he had his childhood. So now we can go on to, well, let's see. I'm just one more thing about Jackie and how long we were in the cottage. So we were in the cottage for about 3 years, and it was just completely blissful. We knew very few people her age except our parents. And although we thought of ourselves as hippies, it turned out that Jackie really was the real thing. She'd grown up on an isolated ranch west of Ukiah and knew how to tar a roof, knew how to can fruit. And here she is at age 76. She would go down in the neighborhood and gather brush for a fire, and she could also repair a gutter on any house she rented out. So one of the stories she told me when I interviewed her in 1980 for the Gifts of Age book, I'll read to you. Did you see my new railing down in front? I felt it needed it because my friends were getting so wobbly. I took 2 years stewing about it, but I was lazy and I didn't want to tackle it alone. I guess I could afford to have a man come in and add pipes, but then I thought, I have a 4x4 redwood post, and I have a good post hole digger, and I know how to soak it in creosote. And then a young man came along who needed extra work, and I thought, my railing. I said, let's go up in the black acacia woods. I know where there's a tall sapling about 16 feet long. And that night we sneaked it out and carried it home and oiled the branches with linseed oil. The railing looks just right, as though it's always been there. So that was that. I knew that I wanted to be just like her when I grew up. Now we can start with the next slide. So Jackie's creativity really impressed me and inspired me. And I just want to share some of the drawings. She did a yearly Christmas card. Sometimes she would put a film of gesso over it. They were so gorgeous, and most of us who knew her collected them. And then go ahead. The next one is another Christmas card. If you go back for just a minute. Howdy do, Father Christmas. She was a poet. She loved to write. She loved to garden. She did fabulous ceramics. And I'm going to show you a few of the pieces that she made here. She was well known for her glazes, particularly her celadon glaze. Okay. When she was in her 80s, she decided to work at her big table in the sunshine behind me and fashion these wonderful little animals that you could hold in your hand. The giraffe, the elephant. Her diaries at the time mostly described the weather. Billowy clouds today, pink flowers starting to bloom. I hope my 1980 is bright. I woke up to a blue sky and a chance for outdoor work, taming the overgrown bushes and moving in my new student. If you wake up and write in your book, it's horrible weather, then you can just go on from there. It helps. Jackie knew how to balance dark thoughts with small pleasures. She said, my floors are dirty. Russia is piling soldiers into Afghanistan, but there is one pure green and yellow primrose in bloom. So now we would like to show you the first of the short videos. This was done in 1989 with Ellen Jory. Jackie is sitting across from where I am now.
They were about 3 inches long, and I wanted 2 good new cats to be Mausers. And what I got were these things, and they're still growing, and they're now 3 months old, and they keep me amused most of the time when I have the time to be home. Anyway, I didn't expect to run a cat nursery, but I did. And you can see how the fireplace is blocked up. Now, we don't use the fireplace in the summer much, but all that wiring is to keep the kittens out of the fireplace. They think that's their natural box. And I was going to burn a fire for you this morning because the fireplace looks a lot better with the fire in it. The house looks better with the fire in it. And I think Maybeck thought that fires were magnets and would draw people and make people happy. And they sure makes this house warm so we can be happy. So the house is so small, actually, and they built it for us with the twins in view, and therefore, in a way, it's the twins' house. It's you can't change it. I don't have any wall space. I put things, I can't put another picture in this house because there isn't wall space. I would have to take it down, take something down. That's all right. It's good to change things.
Jackie had been a widow for 15 years when we met her. She'd dealt with grief and loneliness, but by then she'd moved out of it. In 1980, she told me, "You begin to find yourself, you change your format and your attitude towards things. Being a widow gives you tremendous freedom, suddenly more than you can handle at times. I think of freedom now as something you have to work very hard for." At the time in 1978, Jackie was renting a room in her house to a student, Annie Cole. Annie adored Jackie, and she reminded me, Jackie would wake up to tea and her Pillsbury croissant, play with her cats, and then head outdoors for physical work. She kept the islands on Maybeck Twin Drive clear of brush, and she burned all the brush in the fireplace you just saw. And she kept the trees trimmed. Of course, she could tar a roof and level a stair. After lunch came careful accounting of her rental houses. She lived simply and could make a chair or fashion a dress to set off her collection of Navajo jewelry. When it rained and my bedroom roof leaked, she gave me 5 pails and reminded me to move my bed somewhere dry. Jackie, Lloyd, and I stayed good friends until she died in 1996 at age 95. And in 2013, we bought her house. And I realized that I just knew very little about her life, what had shaped her and what had supported her to become this stunning, inspiring woman we'd known. So I set to work researching, interviewing, visiting with her daughters, Cherry and Sheila, and 4 of her grandchildren. Together, we found diaries, we found unpublished stories and essays. And I started to learn where she had come from and what challenges she had. And I still needed to know, how did she deal with early widowhood and loneliness? So just to go back a bit, for those of you who haven't maybe read some of her memoirs or have tried, and is this that there, that's okay, okay, we're on the perfect one. Here we are in Java. Jacomina Adriana van Heusen was born in Surabaya, Java in 1901. Her father, Pieter, was a sugar chemist, and Helene often didn't join him when he went off to work, but this time she did, and Jackie was born there. But in 7 months, they moved back to Holland, and Jackie loved her extended family. This is her maternal grandmother on the left and Aunt Moll on the right. And in her memoir, she talks about how the grandmothers who in their 80s just would jump on their bike and go back and forth to each other's houses. However, when Jackie was 6, and I want to stay on this photo for a minute. No, on the when Jackie was 6 photo. Oh, well, you know what? Sorry, this is Jackie's 10 here. Let's go back. Jackie's 10 here, but okay, sorry, I'm confusing myself. When Jackie was 6, Uncle Nick, who was her mother's uncle, somehow got the family to take a trip across the Atlantic and across the entire US, because he said there was gold in the Shasta Hills and he found it. Well, of course he hadn't, and gold had petered out. So they ended up coming up north across California, building and remodeling houses and selling them, trying to make a living. And they finally landed in Crockett. And this is the photo I like, where Jackie is 10. And to me, she looks so confident. She's in the 5th grade. She's probably fluent in English at this point. She's nice to her little brother. I just mentioned that for somebody I know who might be watching. And then we can go to the next slide. Here they are hiking on Low Gap Road, which is a bit further north. And I love this photo. These were from the family's scrapbooks. And here's Mom in her hiking outfit. And the next slide, you see Pop in his hiking outfit. Well, here come the Maybecks. Bernard Maybeck had built a house for Professor Flagg in 1909, just west of Ukiah. And Uncle Nick, Jackie's uncle, married Flagg's daughter, Amy. They would go up to the country and camp near the house. And they invited the Maybecks as well as the Van Heusen family. Jackie met Wallen when she was 10 years old and he was 13. Wallen had a sister, Kerna, who was 9, and Jackie had a brother, Pete, who was 9. And they just remember spending the summers together, camping, roaming the hills. And in her memoirs, Jackie writes that she knew she would marry Wallen. At this point, she knew this. The Maybecks bought 2,000 acres, 10 miles west of Ukiah on an isolated land full of oaks, manzanitas, grasses, creeks, and they had a very special water coming. Let's see, Lawanda, you need to mute yourself if you don't mind. If you can hear me, that's great. So the kids worked on the cabin together. Jackie called it half a cabin because I don't think it ever really got finished. They ate fried oatmeal and they drank the fresh sweet water. Then the Van Heusens bought 100 acres in 1913 on Pine Ridge Road, very near the Maybecks' land. At this point, I was starting to get really curious about this land. Here's another Pine Ridge in the snow. Through a very close friend, Susan, who lives in Ukiah, I met Noni and Jerry Cheney, who actually live on Pine Ridge Road. And because many of you listening are historians, I know you'll understand the urgency that I felt to talk to them. So Susan and I drove the long, hour-long, narrow, potholed road from Ukiah out to the Cheney's home, where Noni had made a huge, actually, berry cobbler for us. And it turns out that Noni's parents, the Dorries, bought acreage directly from the Maybecks in 1913. Noni's the 4th generation to live on this land, and her kids make up the 5th generation. So Noni shared all kinds of scrapbooks and maps with us. And if you look closely, right in the middle, you'll see the Maybecks plot. And she said that the Van Heusens bought 100 acres from the Maybecks that same year. So it's a little confusing who bought what from whom. Then the next slide, we hiked to the very edge of the Cheney's property, and Noni pointed to a huge redwood tree in the distance. And she said, "That's where the Van Heusen ranch was. I don't know what's there now. Everyone is growing marijuana and all the gates have huge locks on them." As a 6-year-old, Noni remembers seeing Jackie's father, Peter, climbing the ridge in his tall black boots and big coat, walking the 12 miles into town and stopping by Noni's house on the way back. I hope you'll read the book, Blooming in Winter, especially the epilogue, and then you'll hear the rest of the story of trying to find the ranch. So now I want to tell you a bit about the ranch. Jackie was probably 15 when her family finally had enough money to start building on their property. And this meant using the trees on the land for poles, killing rattlesnakes as necessary, and eating beans when the roads were too flooded. They were true pioneers, and Jackie would live with that sensibility all of her life. She wrote, "The ridge lay to the west, and sometimes white fog floated over it. Down in our meadow, there were little woods of manzanita trees, red trunks and little bellflowers in January. You knew where they were when you heard bees buzzing. Spring was mad with wildflowers. Summer sizzled with heat and was canning time. Autumn gripped the air and we cut wood for winter. Winter was weather and isolation. And with the roof finally over their heads, in that first year, Jackie apparently would walk to school the 12 miles, but she had lots of company from a family named the Bensons, who lived on the way and had 7 kids. And in high school, Jackie says that she lived in 3 separate houses of friends of her mother's in Ukiah, and would get a buggy ride home on the weekends. And then when everyone else went off to college, she got a teaching certificate and stayed on Pine Ridge Road and taught at the local school for 2 years to earn enough money to go to college. My favorite ranch story, and I don't like what I'm talking about, but I think it's worth it. She says, I heard a queer, persistent sound, suspicious. I peered over the kitchen door and shouted for a flashlight and gun. Mother held the light, and under the bench lay a big rattlesnake rattling furiously at a tiny, curious yellow kitten. He stuck his head out and I shot him. The dog went crazy. We turned the bench over and I cut off his head with a hoe and put the miserable thing in the stove. So that's quite a story. And in this one, she says, it's hot as a griddle. We wear almost no clothes and we sweat and we sweat. I love it, but poor mother wilts. And Lloyd and I knew that Jackie loved the heat and she hated the Berkeley fog and just always said that she wanted to put this house on wheels and take it up to the ranch. So here we have another video. This one is from a small book that Jackie and her very best friend from college, Flo Jury, wrote called The 4-Year Stretch. It's about their college years. And I just wanted to add that in this video, Flo seems very quiet, but we knew her well, and she was a wonderfully animated person. We don't have sound. Or do we? Let's see her. And we don't have sound. I can tell you a bit what she's saying here. She says, Ellen asks Jackie.
I'm sorry. Is it possible, Anne, it's because you're muted?
Yeah, probably. So I'll
Start
take it
over.
back and start over.
Jackie, what brought you to Berkeley?
How's
Here
that?
we go.
Oh, I wanted to see the world. And here it was in Berkeley, I thought. It was too. And here we are, young and beautiful, coming to Berkeley. And this was in 1923. It's hard to believe that we're still friends. We're still talking together, working together in 1989, is it? Yes. And we had this idea of a Christmas card for our friends one time. And we put it all together and it made quite a little book. But we just found we could talk to the book and put down the things we were doing in these 4 years that we were in college when we knew each other. And out of that sprang this friendship that has lasted until now. And we hitched our ideas of Berkeley and of our studies to what was happening in the world. And Flo can read you some of these things. We took turns writing a page and took full responsibility. Jackie, what brought you to Berkeley?
Oh.
We know our town pretty well by now. We could dance at the varsity. we could, at the corner of Telegraph and Bancroft or at the Claremont Hotel. There was a lovely dining room in the big house at Bancroft and Fulton. It's the water company now. Then it served fried chicken and biscuits. There was Charlie Dutton's on Oxford and Center, where you got dinner and music for $1.50. We swished our long skirts across the campus and always wore hats to the city, gloves too. There was a wide expanse of just plain dry grass above Oxford Street and almost up to the library. The campus looked pretty rural. It was all downhill from the house on Prospect, where we lived, to our classrooms. Flo and I had a reputation for walking together very fast, and very few people could keep up with us.
We're back to our slides. So in this picture, Jackie is on the right with her sort of smooth hair and her necklace. And to her right is Flo. And then comes Irma, and then Kay Morris, who became a doctor and worked in Petaluma. And the one more thing to say about the year that Jackie went to college. She went to college in 1923, and that was the year of the horrible and swift fire that tore through Berkeley and went all the way down to Shattuck. It completely burned the senior Maybeck's house that Jackie had stayed in one summer when she was at Berkeley. And it was a huge, huge brown shingle house, and it burned to the ground. And the only thing that was left was the chimney. So all of this land was burned at that point. But Jackie and Flo called it their huge adventure. And she refers to it frequently about, that was our big adventure. Okay, then in the summers, during college, the Maybecks and the Van Husens still vacationed together and worked on the cabin and the ranch. So Jackie and Wallen were together a lot. There's a page from the family scrapbook. Wallen's on the left. You can see Jackie. Well, Jack, I'm not sure what Wallen meant by that or who wrote that. And then the last one is, I think, back in the Maybeck's cabin. And I think that's Wallen on the left and maybe Jackie's brother on the right. So you could see it was pretty funky. So now Jackie graduates from college and she goes to Portland with her friend Flo, and she and Wallen started exchanging letters. There's a full copy of the letter in my book, and it's a very intimate and frank letter. Sort of, you get the idea that at that point, Jackie was becoming a bit ambivalent about marriage, and she was worried about her desire for creative work and what on earth was she going to do down there in Berkeley while Wallen, who had already graduated, was working in San Francisco at the telephone company. She says in her letter, Wallen, I haven't a clear idea yet what I'll do down there, because what I want most is expressive activity. The field somehow doesn't matter so much because I haven't a decided talent or interest outside of people, gardens, adventure, dogs, horses, and the ranch, traveling, stage work, and you. She did date other men during college, but none matched Wallen. In 1927, they married privately away from the family in Vancouver. And this need for privacy would become a theme for the rest of their lives. In 1929, Jackie gave birth to twins. Twins were unexpected. She writes that the doctor said, uh-oh, there's a blockage. Well, the blockage was the second baby. And Jackie, unfortunately, suffered postpartum depression after this. And of course, there was little available at that time. And so she went to the ranch for most of that first year. Wallen would drive up to the ranch on the weekend, and Jackie had her beloved mother's help. And then when they did come back to town, they lived at the cottage and they worked on fixing up what was called the cubby house, which was the old Maybeck garage that was offered to them. And they remodeled it and made it a cozy home. The next two pictures are from the ranch log, and I'll read you what this says. The ranch log was a journal that her mother kept, or her mother had, and it was a decade of time from early in their marriage, 10 years out. And I was so thankful to have it shared with me, because it helped me understand the timeline, who was doing what and where. So Wallen just says, this is a perfectly good picture of what did not quite happen. We left Berkeley early yesterday morning and traveled interminably at 25 miles per hour in a convalescent packy. That's what he called his car. We defied the storm gods and they gave us perfect weather. And Jackie writes, how goes it, Father Christmas? Oh, pegging along, lovely day, Jack. So I'm thinking that it says trail to ranch. So they must have driven most of the way of those 10 or 12 miles and then sort of hiked in the last part, because it was winter. And then in the next one, which is from 1932, go back one slide, go back one more. It's the second ranch picture.
I don't think I have it. I'm sorry. And now it's behaving very strangely. There it is.
There. Well, Wallen just says, been here a long time, semi-savage like, absorbing some sweat and just cut wood, made clothesline, hunted deer and shot blue jays. Wallen. And from this ranch log, I really got a good sense of Wallen's humor. So now in 1932, the Maybecks built number 2751 Buena Vista Way for Wallen, Jackie, and the twins. They called it the High House, and this is the house I'm in right now. This is a very early picture. Flo wrote of the creative and fabulous parties that they had, and the twins told me that they would come upstairs after the parties and sip all the leftover drinks. The next slide is of the twins' 5th birthday party. Jackie's on the left with a crown on her head and Wallen on the right. And then behind them is Wallen's sister, Kerna. And the thing that's so striking about this picture to me is that it is the only picture that anyone could find, the grandchildren, the daughters of the whole family in High House. So what started happening after they had been in the house for a bit was that Jackie and Wallen, or particularly Jackie, I would say, felt a need for more privacy. She clashed with little Annie, Maybeck's wife. They were both very opinionated, strong, ambitious women. And so I started becoming confused when I was researching who lived where and when. It seemed to be a very fluid housing arrangement. The Maybecks seemed to exchange houses easily with each other. And of course, they added rooms where rooms were needed. In this Esther Bourne photograph, there is no date, but it does look to me like the senior Maybecks have moved into the house. That's got to be Maybecks. He's made a huge drafting table in the living room and he's got his easels up. And this was a time when Jackie and her family rented a house across the bay in Marin County. Well, during one of the rentals that they were in over in Ross, it turned out that suddenly the owner needed his house back. And so Jackie and Wallen drove over and met with Annie and Bernard, and they said, you know, we want our house back. You said that it's our house. But the Maybecks said, well, we'll build you another house. And so take a look at this drawing. This was up in Carrie's house up in Seattle. And it's the size of a poster. So I'm not sure if Jackie did something with it there in 1937, but she's got the ranch up there in Ukiah. She's got the Ross house that they were renting, and then come down to the High House on the left. And on the very bottom, it says Solano, and that is they rented an apartment in Berkeley on Solano while their house was being built, which is the 135 Purdue. So that house is in Kensington, and it was 3 miles away, which was probably nice for everyone feeling too close here. And it was so interesting to me because Jackie could have stamped her foot, or the Maybecks could have moved back to the cottage, or Jackie could have moved into the cottage, but somehow here was another house being built for Jackie and Wallen. She says, "I worked like a pioneer woman all day and got such coal dust on my hands as would barely come off. House building is more than just rushing ahead doggedly. One must stop and rest and dream and revisualize the house and the life one is working toward. The wind roars and I don't mind. I love it. It's mine, and though still an ugly, unfinished duckling, we swell with love of it." And that was from her diary. So she was writing that to herself. And I think she actually did love that house. It had a huge yard, and she was able to do a lot of planting. But the family lived in this Kensington house, called Hilltop, by the way, for only 4 years. And in one of those years, in 1938, while they were living in Hilltop, Jackie writes, "The Maybecks almost burned our house down." It turns out that Annie was cooking French fries here in High House. And then she got the driver and they went down the hill to get some extra supplies. And when they came back, the house was in flames. The roof burst out, the windows burst out. And I mean, you can just imagine Jackie, what she thought at this point. I mean, maybe by that time she was thinking that the Kensington house was hers. Eventually, the Maybecks did repair the house, but once again, poor Jackie. Okay, then we switched to Wallen. Wallen was a major in the Army, and for 2 years, starting in 1942, Jackie and the twins joined him, and he was stationed all across the country. She loved a town in New Mexico. She didn't like Ohio. She writes about that in her memoirs. And then after 2 years, Jackie decided to drive the twins home, or the twins were just learning how to drive. And when they came back to Berkeley, they found this house, High House, empty. The Maybecks had gone to the Gold Country. And just go back 1 minute, Anne. The Maybecks had gone back to the Gold Country because there were no drivers to drive them, and neither of them drove. So at that point, they moved back in. And in this picture, which I think might be the end of high school, for 2 years, the twins and Jackie lived in High House, and Wallen was away in England. So the kids finished high school. And then in September of 1946, in the next slide, the whole family goes to post-war Germany with these beautiful twins. And once again, Jackie writes this gorgeous, intimate, long story that hopefully someday we'll be able to read. She writes, "It's cold, but life moves strongly, urgently, hopefully. The ration for the people was 1 egg in 6 months, but they did without to get dollar credit to buy back tools lost in the war." And one of the things that Jackie found in Germany was that she loved ceramics. She was able to work at a potting wheel at some little place nearby. And coming back on the boat, well, this is the twins. And then they visited Holland, which of course was the first time Jackie had been back. Sorry, I didn't say that earlier. So finally, she finds her passion in ceramics. She's coming back on the boat and she says, "I can feel ideas thrashing about. They will become a part of my thought pattern, bigger, more liberal patterns for my having been stretched around this circle and made to see and feel and do new things." And once again, they were able to return to this house, High House. The Maybecks had moved back to the cottage, And when they got back, Jackie enrolled in the California College of Arts and Crafts and became a very, very popular teacher and worked with clay the rest of her life. In the 1950s were a difficult decade. All four parents of Jackie and Wallen died. Jackie's mother died of a stroke. Her father died in a horrible accident on the ranch. And Annie and Ben died. And finally, it was 1957. And then we go to the next slide. And this is Wallen retired in 1958. Jackie's on the left and Wallen's sister, Kerna, is on the right. And I think at this time when they were living in the high house, that they were beginning to feel that the house was their own. So this is one of my favorite pictures ever. It's taken by Ted Straczynski in 1961. And Jackie's got a cat in her lap, Wallen's smoking his pipe. The kids are married, they've got grandchildren. It seems like they've finally got their house and have finally settled. However, in 1962, Wallen died. He died of a heart attack after a day of rafting near Cloverdale. Jackie was alone. She was 61 years old. She says, "Before, I had felt utterly irresponsible and frivolous. Things would always come out all right. There was Wallen, the family, and the land to count on. These years since Wallen died are like a tree that began to put out little leaves and blossoms where before it was a bare tree. It began to grow." She says that eventually she went from feeling like half a person to finding ways to be happy again. You begin to find yourself, she wrote. You change your format and your attitude towards things. Being a widow gives you tremendous freedom, suddenly more than you can handle at times. I think of freedom now as something you have to work for very hard. So now I want to go back to when Lloyd and I knew Jackie in 1978. This photo is from our wedding. With Jackie's blessing, the time seemed right. Lloyd and I had lived together off and on for 10 years. And the wedding was, of course, on the cottage lawn, right across the street from where I am right now at High House. Jackie wrote The Family View in 1980 when she was 79. It's about the Maybecks. And she says it brought her a bit of fame and new friends. She'd become the spokesman of all things Maybeck and gave house tours, talked with architects and historians wanting to hear original stories about the family. This is a terrible picture of me on the left. I think I had just given birth, and Lloyd in the back, Jackie in the front, and then Annie Cole, and the man she would eventually marry. Annie was the one that had lived with Jackie in the leaky bedroom. Jackie said, "By rolling into it, you begin to find out what you have in your own head and do something about it." That's what the books were. A lot of relationships develop, and that's been so satisfying. You become a personality instead of just being a person. I felt I'd acquired a point of view and usefulness that I'd never had before. And then we're going to show you another video with Jackie and Flo.
To become really a part of Berkeley, you have to be a many-faceted person because there are demands from all sides. You know, help with this, help with getting new people on the rent board, help in saving the landmarks of town, help with the creeks of Berkeley, maybe uncover them, make them beautiful again, help with the school system. Schools are being closed down. We want to save the school.
Let's see.
I'm laughing because that was 30 years ago, and it sounds like the same things are still going on. In 1980, I asked Jackie whether there were gifts of age, and she said, You remind me of one of the privileges of being older. You can have an awful lot of fun with younger men because they are no longer afraid of you and afraid you'll snatch them into marriage. So I have about 5 young men, about 50-ish, that I'm very good friends with. I'm not having affairs with them. Men can relax with an older woman and enjoy themselves. This makes for a very nice kind of friendship. I go out with one man to the opera and on botany walks with another. I love that. We stayed good friends with Jackie all those years. Here she is back in our backyard after we moved. Our kids loved her. She was their magical grandmother who lived in an unusual wooden house surrounded by trees. And she's here with my son, Scott. I photographed Jackie a lot. Oh, now okay. I photographed Jackie a lot. I was worried that she would leave us. Luckily, that didn't happen until 1996 when she was 95 years old. This was her 90th birthday. This is my son, Zach, on the left and Scott on the right. They had made her a chocolate cake with gobs of frosting and sparkles. And then in her 90s, Jackie posed for a drawing by Joan Fenton, who lives in Berkeley and has donated this to the Berkeley Historical Society. And then we have one more video to share with you.
What's your life like with the Maybecks, you and Wallen and the children?
It's very hard to say because your life goes in cycles. You know, I had the time when the twins were tiny and he was entirely given over to that mothering period. And we spent half the time up on the ranch. I'd go up there with the twins. Wallen would go weekends. We spent a lot of time up there because my mother was alone part of the year. And that's probably where I learned to make do. If you wanted a chair, you built it. If you wanted a house, you built it. My father was a Dutch sugar chemist. He loved land the way all Hollanders do because they have to work so hard for their land. And he went up there on that ranch not knowing anything about farming or ranching or building, and he built his own house. He read a book and he built his own house. And of course, we helped him. We learned from him all sorts of things to take care of tools, for instance. I still tell my handymen who are working around how to take care of their tools the way my father took care of his tools. And they last forever and you're proud of them. I learned both from my own family and from the Maybecks that work is the most fun you can have. Pleasure is work, but real work is more pleasure. Hard to explain. So everybody has to charge his own life with some motive. Everybody has to go his own way. I couldn't just be a follower of Maybeck, for instance, just because I was near him. I could respect him tremendously. And I loved him very much because he was that kind, he was a lovable person. He was interested in you. He wanted young people to just make progress in their lives. But each of us, I think, had a life to live on his own, and these lives joined at certain social periods.
In the summer of 1925, Jackie's ranch boyfriend, Huntington, asked her, what did she want to be? She said, well, I was going to be a legend. I hope that Jackie's happy with the book. It's certainly given me a point of view and usefulness I've not had before. Jackie bloomed throughout her life, but matured into a special woman, one who will inspire those of us thinking about how to live now in our own winter years. At age 90, she wrote, Really, age is a damn nuisance. You have to work harder for everything, but magic things still happen. And with that, I want to thank the Berkeley Historical Society and Anne and Janine, and maybe turn it over to Janine if we have time for just a few questions.
Yes. So I encourage you to write your questions in the chat because that's the easiest way for me to see them. So I have 2 questions here that were already written in. The first is, what did Jackie's brother Pete do as an adult?
And
Do you know the answer to that?
Yes, I do know, and I can't remember. The horrible thing is I think he was a dentist, but I don't think that's right. And this is where, when I've watched the other Berkeley Historical Society videos, other people chimed in. I just can't remember.
Okay, so if somebody knows what Pete did, then
Do you remember, Lloyd? He sort of dropped out of the picture, as did Kerna, Wallen's sister.
Okay, I wonder, anyhow, if anyone knows, you could add it in to the chat.
We can find out later.
We'll find out later. I wonder if it's in one of Jackie's books, the Places and People. It's not in there. Okay.
No.
Okay, another question. What are the twins' names?
Cherry and Sheila. And Sheila lived to be, I think, 91, and she died about 2 years ago. And she lived in Seattle, and Cherry lived in Santa Cruz, and she died this year, very recently.
And Cherry was a nickname, right? It was Adriana. She was named after
Adriana. Her real name was Adriana. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know? I'm curious myself. Do you know how she got the nickname Cherry?
Nope, I don't.
Okay, but she was always known as Cherry, as far as you know, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and you alluded to grandchildren, so both Cherry and Sheila had children, right? So
yes, they each had 3 children.
Okay. All right. Someone asked, who is or was Wallen? And somebody else answered in the chat, but do you want to say quickly who was Wallen?
Wallen was Jackie's husband, and he was the son of Bernard Maybeck.
Yes, it's Bernard and Annie Maybeck. So here's a question. What is your favorite memory of Jacomina, Pam?
Well, watching these videos has really brought her back. The thing that was so amazing is we could talk about anything. And I remember when our kids were probably in elementary school, maybe 5th or 6th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you know, if we were having trouble with our sons of any sort, we could just talk with Jackie about it. And the same thing with her, she would talk to us about the problems she was having. So I feel like that's my favorite thing, was just being able to talk. We got together a lot. We shared a lot of dinners, a lot of lunches.
Okay, so this next question is a little similar. What lesson did you learn from Jacomina that you are living out today?
Whoa, that is a very good question. What lesson? I can't say that I'm living out anything, but I guess knowing her in her 80s and 90s and seeing that she felt confident enough in her 80s to write a book, and then confident again in her 90s to write a book. I feel like maybe that's what I've gotten from her. I feel like I got that from my parents as well.
Okay, thank you. So what is Okay, I'm just going to read this one because it came up, and then we'll go back to another one. So someone says, a story I think Jacomina talks about in one of her books is that the senior Maybecks were not initially inclined to return to the property after the 1923 fire until Wallen started to camp out in the ruins. Do you recall stories Jacomina told regarding this?
Well, after the fire in 1923, they of course had nowhere to live, as did the other 500 homes that had burned. And so right after that, apparently Wallen would drive up and camp out on the cement floor of his old workshop at the site. And I'm pointing down, actually my hand's going the wrong way, down there. And eventually, very shortly after that, Maybeck built him a one-room house. And the interesting thing is, and you'll see this in the book, a reference that just before that, Maybeck had written an article about what a one-room house might look like. And so that's what he built for Wallen. So Wallen's house, which is called the studio, is on Buena Vista Way between La Loma and our house. And it was the first house built. And I'll just tell you quickly, just because it's so confusing to people. But first they built the studio for Wallen, then they built the cottage that we got married in. That was for the senior Maybecks. And then they built this house for Jackie and Wallen, and they built a house up the street similar to this for their daughter and for themselves. And then there's other houses in the neighborhood that they helped build.
Yeah. So here's a question. I love how Jacomina talks about magical things. Was this her philosophy of life? So I guess the magic of certain things.
I think it was a word. I think it was a word. She was very poetic, and I think it's just a word. I don't think she believed in anything particularly magic, but she said magical things will happen. I think it was just a lovely way of saying, you know, if you stick with it, maybe something will grow out of that.
Okay, another question. What is it like to live in Jacomina's house now?
It is fabulous. Lloyd and I, almost every morning, we thank the gods that we get to live here. The way it was built, it's got these windows on both sides, and the windows are filled with trees and birds. And it just feels like you're maybe out in the country, but you're just really a mile away from Peace Coffee. So we love living here. We're lucky. Jackie in her video said it's a small house, which every time I hear that, it cracks me up. This is not a small house. It has a lot of rooms in it, but we're lucky that we got the house after we had both retired. So Lloyd has an office in one corner, and I have an office down in the other corner, and separated by a floor. So I think it's keeping us sane living together.
Okay. So somebody else asked, do you own the house, and did Jacomina want you to own it?
Well, that is a great question. Yes, we do own the house. We bought it in 2013. And I have a piece in the book. I almost read it tonight, but Jackie's just talking away about the hill, and she's saying, well, I think my daughters will help take care of it. And in fact, the Maybecks still own the house right up behind us called Arrillaga. It's been rented out. It's been rented out to the same man that lived with us in a unit in the cottage back in '78, named Victor. So somewhere in there, Jackie said, when I was interviewing her, she said, well, you know, I think the grandkids will take care of the house. I mean, we were surprised that neither of the daughters and none of the grandchildren wanted to buy the house after Jackie died. So I was going to say one more thing, but I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Anyway, yes, we own it. Oh, so what she said, that's right. So way back then in 1980, when in an interview that I did, she said, well, Pam, why don't you come up and assert yourself? And at the time I thought, no way are we ever going to live here. So I think she might be okay with us living here.
So did it go through just one?
Thank you, Francine. Francine's nodding her head.
Was it just one owner between her and you?
Huh?
Was there just one owner between her and you?
Was there just one what?
Owner of the house.
Yes. Yes. Do you want to hear that story?
Sure.
Well, I mean, after Jackie died in 96, the family didn't sell the house for a while. There was a person that had taken care of Jackie, and she and her family lived here for a while. And when they did put it on the market, Lloyd and I heard about it, and we raced over here, and yeah, we have to buy it. But at the time, we didn't have much money, and we also we're still working. And I was working in Walnut Creek at Kaiser, and Lloyd was working in Oakland. And so we did bid on the house, and we didn't get it. And the person that got it was Kathy Brown, who got this house. She was already living in the cottage where we'd gotten married. And then in 2013, when Kathy sold the house, we bid on it again. And we presented ourselves as being extremely lovable and cute, as much as we possibly could. And Kathy sold it to us. And now Kathy lives in the cottage. We live here. We've lived in Kathy's house. Kathy's lived in our house, and we're great friends. So it's worked out.
Right. So I'll just read a comment. Said my sister kindly loaned me your book, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much for sharing this delightful and inspiring woman.
Thank you.
And someone else comments, yes, your house is gorgeous, and the setting of your story, and is the setting of your story. A very inspiring home with lofty heights and easy to imagine Jackie living there.
True.
So I think that's all the, let's see, are there any more questions here? Someone says it's been such a fascinating and enjoyable presentation.
Janine, Chuck has a question.
Okay, I can't see, so Chuck, go ahead and just ask your question.
I got to put myself on. I was just going to ask, where can people buy the book?
Well, thank you for asking that very smart question. Okay, first of all, we have 10 copies, all nicely signed, sitting right down at the Berkeley Historical Society waiting for you. And they will be there for a while. And then you can also buy it at any bookstore. All the bookstores in the Bay Area can order it. Some of them are carrying 1 copy or 2 copies. So you can do it that way, and there's always Amazon.
Great.
But thanks for bringing that up, because I would love everyone to have a copy.
And Janine, would you like to mention again the idea of that at some point in the future we'll have a program where we show the full length videos of Jacomina?
Yeah. And
Yes,
had a great idea.
Yes, so I think that now we're all using Zoom. It seems like a good way to share these videos is to have Zoom events. And each interview is 40 minutes, so I think it would make a good program. So that is in the offing, and we will. If you're not on the Berkeley Historical Society's mailing list, then you should go to our website and join and get on our mailing list, so you'll know about that. Yeah, we'll probably have other, we found that, there are other videos that Ellen Drury collected, and we have ones from the 20s or teens, and anyhow, so maybe we'll start having some movie nights.
Movie night.
Video parties, and people
Yeah.
who remember those old times can chime in, or their grandparents or something lived then. I think we have some things about the fire, some videos of the fire.
Something rather different, but also about interesting, strong women. We're going to have a program on October 10th about, well, the Berkeley of Kamala Harris's youth.
Oh,
Influences on Kamala Harris, what her mother was like, and what the some other people talking who have memories of the Harris family. So
that sounds great.
Other good reason to get on our mailing list.
Yes.
Here it is, 8:10,
Okay.
and somebody's just entered the waiting room.
Oh, they must have thought it started at 8, not 7. Hi.
Well, should we say our goodbyes and our thank yous?
All right, thank you, everybody.
Yeah,
Thank you, Anne
you.
and Pam.
Thank you, everyone, so much. It
Thank
was really
you.
fun.
Okay.
Okay.